Good evening to all of you, and welcome to this evening's event organized by the Monterey Institute of International Studies. And my name is Sundar Ramaswamy, and as the president of the Institute, it gives me a great pleasure to offer to members of the community, in addition to faculty, staff, students, and other friends of the Institute, tonight's event. The Institute is as many of you know, is a rather unique cross-cultural professional graduate school that offers 11 different degrees in master's degrees in areas ranging from international policy studies to business to environmental policy to interpretation, among others. And one of our hallmarks is to offer our students practical professional opportunities as part of their academic work. Tonight, I'd like to acknowledge the students in the booths in the very back of this auditorium who are interpreting tonight's proceedings in Chinese, Russian, and Spanish. And it's truly because of all the background work they do when we have events like this and with what our faculty train them to that makes this one of the topmost interpretation programs in the country, if not the world. I also want to extend a very special thanks to members of our Founders and Legacy Society members in the front who have been very generous friends who invest in the students, faculty, and programs that have made this institute a rather dynamic and very relevant learning environment over the last 5 decades. Tonight's special guest, Dr. Reza Aslan, is a scholar, activist, and author who was born in Iran and now lives in Los Angeles. Through a variety of mediums and activities, Dr. Aslan has strived to enhance cultural understanding and shift American views of the Middle East away from the ubiquitous image of terrorists and fanatics. The scholar Dr. Aslan holds degrees in religion from Santa Clara University, Harvard University, and University of California, Santa Barbara, and is currently an associate professor of creative writing at UC Riverside. The activist Dr. Aslan is engaged in numerous endeavors. He is a contributing editor to the Daily Beast, president and CEO of Aslan Media Incorporated, whose holdings include Boom Gen Studios, a media company focused on producing video content about the greater Middle East and its diaspora. He has a large following on various social networking platforms, and if you want to follow him on Twitter and Facebook, please check in Aslan Media. He is a frequent guest speaker and commentator on both radio and television, including NPR, MSNBC, and my favorite, The Daily Show. The author, Dr. Aslan, has gained international attention and recognition for his writing. His first book, No God But God, The Origins, Evolution, and the Future of Islam, was named one of the 100 most important books of the last decade and has been translated into 13 languages. His book, How to Win a Cosmic War, discusses confronting religious extremism in a globalized age. For his latest project, Dr. Aslan edited a collection of short stories, memoirs, essays, and poems addressing issues and cultures of the Middle East, featuring both contemporary and historical works, with many of the selections newly appearing in English. Tablet and Pen, Literary Landscapes from the Modern Middle East, will be released later this month. So as you can see, Dr. Aslan is an innovative, entrepreneurial, and internationalist. In fact, he would
of the year is either Mexicans or Muslims. So God save you if you happen to be a Mexican Muslim in this country. My advice for you is to just stay home. So the economy is important. I think that we also have to recognize that there is a sense of war weariness that has descended upon most Americans. We are 10 years into this global war on terror, these two battlefronts that we're fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. The president just told us a little while ago that one of those wars is over. Really? So what exactly happened? I think a lot of Americans would like to know. What did we actually get for the trillions of dollars and the hundreds of thousands of deaths that came out of that war? What did we get for that? And I think the further we get from September 11th and the more the sort of raw patriotism that kept people from asking these kinds of questions begins to dissipate, the more people are starting to think, well, what is the point of all this? So there is a sense of war weariness, and I understand this fully. I actually make a living talking about these wars, and I'm weary of them. And certainly, we do have to recognize that there has been an uptick in this issue that so many Americans have been worried about for the last decade, which is what if we start dealing with our own homegrown terrorism in this country? What happens if our own Muslims begin to take up arms against us? And although in 10 years there have really been only 2 examples of such a thing happening, they happened back to back this year. I'm talking, of course, about the shooting at Fort Hood by Major Nidal Hassan and the attempted bombing of Times Square by Faisal Shahzad. Now, nobody in the FBI, nobody in counterterrorism, nobody has said that this in any way it amounts to something like a trend. I think if there is a trend, if there is something remarkable about these 2 events, is that in 10 years we've had 2 events. That's the remarkable thing. But nevertheless, I think they have very much focused the American imagination on this sort of internal possibility, the problem of an internal threat to the United States. All of this has added to a situation in which most Americans are becoming, and I literally mean most Americans, are viewing Islam through a completely different lens and viewing America's own Muslim community through a different lens. A community that is thoroughly integrated into every level of American society. A community that is absolutely rich. I'm not exaggerating. The median income for a Muslim household in America is larger than for a non-Muslim household. 60% of Muslims in this country own their own homes. If you believe the advertising giant JWT, the disposable income, the annual disposable income for the Muslim and Middle Eastern community in the United States alone is $170 billion. That's with a B. So one would think that a community that's so wealthy, so thoroughly Americanized, so much a part of the cultural and religious fabric of this country would have nothing to worry about. And in fact, that's not the case at all, as we've been seeing. So all of these things have to do with it. There's no question about it. But there's one issue that I feel like isn't brought up enough. There is one factor involved, something that has changed this year that has really heightened this kind of anti-Islamic sentiment, and that is the election of Barack Obama. 20% of Americans, 1/5 of Americans, believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim. 1 out of 5 people in this country. Now, again, what's interesting about that statistic is that it's an 8-point jump from a year ago. More people believe that Obama is a Muslim today than they did a year ago. In fact, amongst Republicans, that number is 37%. Almost 40% of Republicans believe, if you believe Newsweek, believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim. The people at Pew, God bless them, really sort of started to crunch these numbers and get to the bottom of what this actually means. And what they discovered was absolutely fascinating. It turns out that the more you disagree with Barack Obama's domestic policy, the more likely you are to think he's a Muslim. Disagree with Obama's health care plan? It's because he's a Muslim. Disagree with Obama's, financial regulation bill? You probably think he's a Muslim. There's a correlation between those two things. And I think what that does is that it sort of clarifies more sort of solidly what is happening in this country, which is that it's not just Islam, anti-Islam rhetoric is in the mainstream. It's not just that anti-Islamic sentiment is at unprecedented levels. It's that Islam itself is becoming otherized in this country. It's becoming a receptacle for all of our political and economic anxieties. It's becoming sort of shorthand for anything that's foreign and exotic and unfamiliar. The fear of the changing racial landscape of this country, the anxiety over a new and perhaps unfamiliar I mean, we just had a midterm election, a huge election that's going to have ripples across the planet. Did you actually hear anyone bring up the fact that we're in 2 wars? And of course, there is this other uncomfortable thing, the war on terror. Remember that? War on terror, the whole war of ideas between us and the fanatics, which we've also seemed to have abandoned. The truth is that there is a very serious, very real, concrete national security threat to the way that our rhetoric has defined Islam and American Muslims. This isn't my opinion, by the way. This isn't Reza Aslan telling you this. This is the former National Security Advisor, Jim Jones, saying this. This is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, saying this. This is the Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, who's making this argument. This is the commander of our forces in Afghanistan, David Petraeus, who's been making this argument. These people kind of should know. So if they say that our security is being threatened by the mainstreaming of anti-Muslim rhetoric in this country, we probably ought to pay attention to them. While that's true, and I agree with them fully, I do, I kind of don't care. Because the truth is, and I'm sorry, until Monday, but somehow we managed to get some here. So that's for sale here. It's through literature that has a role to play with it. Films, music, television, these things are incredibly important. Art, these are the universal languages that allow us to get to know each other better. But again, the responsibility continues to fall upon our shoulders. What kind of country do we want to live in? That's the ultimate question. We'll get there. It'll be a while, and it'll have to happen through, not just education, but relationships. But it's really dependent upon every one of us, everyone in this room, everyone watching on their computers. Every single one of us has a role to play in this. What kind of country do we want to live in? That's the question that I want to leave you with. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
6:45 exactly.
Perfectly timed. We have time for Q&A, which Dr. Aslan is going to moderate. And if you have any questions, please come up to the front. There's a mic here, and please state your question, and I'll let him take it from there. Yes.
Okay. In 1974, I was living in Paris, and it was my first introduction to the Muslim community. The Muslim community was, they were colonized by France for decades, of course. And when I went back to France over the years, many times. And I remember going back in the 80s and going to a concert that they hold in Paris in June. It's a music concert, and in front of the Chamber of Deputies and so on and so forth, they were featuring some of the top billed artists from Algeria and from Morocco singing. And I mean, my European experience, which has extended over many years, just in France, I can't speak of the Netherlands, but I think of France as a country where they begrudgingly recognize that their colonialism failed, and they
some of them do.
Right, some of the French do, and that they have embraced the Muslim culture in a way that is healthy. And am I wrong? Is this a naive perception on my part? What's going on in the Netherlands, what you're describing, is very different from the kind of experience that I've seen in France.
I think that's a very good question. And what you experienced was the power that I was talking about of art, and the fact that the great films and the great literature and the great music, especially the music that the Middle East is so famous for, has been thoroughly absorbed by the French. They love it. But, and that's very important, and because I really can't emphasize, when I say that art is the universal language, I really mean it. I was just talking to somebody not too long ago about a recent trip, my first trip to Israel. I've been there many times. My first trip to Israel, I was sitting down with an Israeli friend of mine, and I was, it's like a typical American. I was thinking, well, the problem with the Israelis and the Palestinians is that they just don't know each other. Like, if you guys could just sit down and talk to each other and get to know each other, then, everything would be great. And my Israeli friend said, see, the reason we hate each other so much is because we know each other so well. That's why, because we're neighbors. That may be true, and yet the most popular films in Palestine are Israeli films. The most popular music in Israel are Palestinian bands. They read each other's stories. They listen to each other's music. They watch each other's films, even though they say they can't stand each other. So that's what I mean when I say the power of art, and that's very important. However, the problem with France, and it's a problem one sees throughout Europe, is that it's dealing with an identity crisis of itself. This is partly having to do with the issue of the European Union. The French are being told in no uncertain terms, it's time for you to think of yourself as both French and European. And while many of them don't even know what it means to be European, because it seems like it's just sort of foreign and distant bureaucracy that they have no connection to, 27 different nations, 13 different languages, one birth certificate, one passport, one currency. It's a very weird experience for a lot of older French people to deal with. They're having a hard time figuring out even what it means to be French. And their conception of assimilation and integration goes against everything we Americans believe in. You see, when we say assimilate, what we mean, going back to that sponge metaphor, is you become like us and we'll become like you. American Islamic Relations, the Muslim Public Affairs Council. I mean, do a Google search. You know, it's not that hard. You will see that the voice of Muslims coming out and condemning extremism is enormous. Why don't we hear it? Well, you don't hear it because it's not interesting. That's why. So, I mean, why would you hear it? Why would you hear it? Why would you hear it? Was there a swelling of, moderate Christians who came out after the, abortion doctor was murdered to say, we just want to say to everyone so everyone knows that we reject this? No, I mean, you saw some leaders on TV talking about it in the same way that you see Muslim leaders on TV talking about, violence in Islam, but it's just not newsworthy. I'll give you sort of one personal example of this. And again, I can't really talk too much at length about this because I don't know why you don't know this. I don't know. But I will tell you one sort of personal experience. A few years ago, I went to Turkey with a CNN crew. This was after Pope Benedict had made those comments about the Prophet Muhammad, and and then immediately afterwards was on his way to Turkey. And everyone just thought, oh my goodness, all hell's going to break out in Turkey. So let's just send news crews there. And so I arrived with the CNN crew, and to find that every news organization on the planet had beat us there, waiting for the Pope to arrive. And so we spent the first couple of days going around, getting stock footage and talking to people. We must have talked to dozens and dozens of Turks. And most of them, first of all, had no idea that the Pope was coming at all. Were kind of excited about it. They were like, "This is great for business. This is fantastic. Look at all these journalists. Anybody want any baklava?" So on the one hand, they were kind of excited about it, but on the other hand, even when confronted, a lot of them hadn't even heard what the Pope had said. We told them about it, and they all just kind of went, "Well, that's silly and ignorant," and they just kind of moved on. We kept searching and searching and searching, and so finally, we sent a communique to CNN, to the producers that we were working with. It was a very large group of us there, many, I mean, it was like 3 or 4 different anchors, huge group of people. And what we said was, listen, there's no story here. There's no protests. There's no demonstrations. There's no, no one's burning anything. No one really cares. I mean, yeah, that stuff is happening in Somalia and Sudan and Gaza, sure. But here, nothing's happening at all. We've got a great idea for a story, something that no one else is talking about that's here. The story is that when your GDP is the 3rd fastest growing in the world, when your Muslim community actually has a say in the government, they can vote and make their dreams and aspirations and concerns part of the political process. When you're in a situation in which you've got a car and a house and 2.5 kids, turns out you don't care what the Pope has to say. That's a story. That's a good story. And the response from the producers, and I don't blame them for this, I totally understand, was we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars sending you to Turkey. Go find the story. And sure enough, on the day that the Pope arrived, there was about 200 people. It turned out they all belonged to the same political party that were protesting, which was really interesting because all their signs were in English. Which was weird. And I wasn't the one who noticed this. The anchor that I was working with noticed that they all kind of look like they'd been written by the same hand, too. They all very much uniform. And, we filmed them and we talked about the whole issue. Now, to the credit of the anchor that I was working with, he very clearly stated that, listen, this is nothing. There's only 200 people here. They quite clearly seem to be talking about the current Turkish government and not the Pope at all. They're just using this as an excuse. We just want everyone, all our viewers, to understand that. But that's what we're dealing with, is the problem, is that, by definition, the moderate voice is a quiet voice. It's the moderate voice. I mean, and the platforms that are available for that voice. Internet, news sites, television, those platforms are being used, but they're just not all that effective. And I really don't know what else to say. I mean, I could sit here and just spout out fatwa after fatwa after fatwa condemning violence if you want me to, but it really wouldn't make any difference because you would have never heard of these fatwas and you will never hear of these fatwas. But I do think that it's important to understand that just because the voice of extremism happens to be the loudest voice, that does not necessarily mean that by any means that it's the majority voice. On the contrary. I think we have time for this last question. Yeah.
First off, to follow the gentleman before me, thank you for coming out. I am a new student here. I'm really interested in getting involved. I just found out about this 2 nights ago, so I was trying to write this question down, so bear with me here. I got about 14 different ways to try and ask it.
Try one.
Yeah. Scribbling out my notes. You had hit a lot about, mediums being available to stimulate, understanding and cultural awareness, such as art being a big motivator. It seems sometimes that it doesn't exactly reach as far as it needs to be. It's not as extended. It doesn't have as much outreach as other mediums. Sometimes it's very contained within an isolated circle of people. What would be, in your opinion, do you have any thoughts about what would be a good way to introduce and integrate a common platform into society for cultural understanding, something that reaches out and has a better grip in social institutions?
That's a great question. And actually, that platform already exists. It's called TV. Something really funny happened a little while ago. Did you? I don't know if you maybe you have to be in LA to catch these kinds of stories. But one of the networks, and I won't mention which one it was. We have this thing, the fall lineup, right? The fall lineup comes out, and each network sort of presents what they're going to show that season, right?